Atari 8-bit podcast.
We have this contract with a movie, and we think your game might be, with a little tweaks, might be able to fit the theme of that movie. And that movie was The Last Starfighter. That bonus, within 6 months of my starting there, went from 40,000 to 20,000, and then another 3 months it went to 12,000, and then it went to 8,000.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Bruce Poehlman only worked at Atari for a year, from June 1983 until July 1984, but he told me it was an interesting year. Bruce coded the game The Last Starfighter for the Atari 5200 and 8-bit computers, a game that was never released. 2 years later, he was contracted to rebrand the game as Star Raiders 2. This interview occurred October 6, 2015. Let's start before the beginning. Tell me about how you ended up at Atari, what you were doing before then, and how you got a job at Atari.
Sure. I graduated from college and went to work in the defense industry. And one of my college buddies went straight to work at Atari. And he did his first game, made a big bonus, which was more than I made in a salary for a year. And I said, hey, why don't you sign me up? And that's pretty much how it happened. So that was about June-ish 1982, something like that.
So who was the friend, and what was the program you made?
Gary Stark. The game he did, the first game he did was Cookie Monster Munch. There was this whole Sesame Street series that they were doing, and he did that one, and then he worked with me on Star Raiders too. So we worked together on that for about 9 months to a year.
And you were hired as a programmer?
Right, correct.
Okay. So tell me, when you got there, did you have any idea what you'd be doing? Did you ask for a game? Did they just hand it to you? I mean, how did you get the assignment?
Well, actually, when it was interesting, when the first group that I was in, that Gary was in, he wasn't in the main, 2600 development group. He was in a kind of a splinter group. And that group did some games like the Cookie Monster and some of the other Sesame Street games. But the other thing that they were doing was they actually developed the graphics for the Superman movie. And so they were trying to get into a different area of the film industry, basically, and trying to basically provide special effects, essentially become, something like, what Pixar, ended up being, something along those lines. So they did a lot of the graphics. I think it was for Superman 2, is what if I recall correctly.
Within Atari.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it was really odd programming because it was using Lisp, which was a artificial intelligence type of computer language which I had no experience with, and was starting to learn. And then a couple months into that, they closed that division and brought most of us into the main game development, the home game development group. And at that time, Gary and I had already thought about what kind of game we wanted to develop. Was basically a first-person space shoot-'em-up kind of game. And that was our initial idea. And we actually developed that game for about 4 to 6 months. And then Atari management came to us and said, oh, you know what? So this is the evolution of the game. We have this contract with a movie. And we think your game might be, with a little tweaks, might be able to fit the theme of that movie. And that movie was The Last Starfighter. And so the actual game was developed and completed as The Last Starfighter. But that took it basically took almost a year to completely develop that. And that was on the 5200, 800 platform.
Did it have a working title before it became The Last Starfighter?
I don't remember if there was. I'm sure there was. I'm sure we had one. but it was, it would have been something simple like, Xylon Attack or something like that.
Sure.
That, I don't recall what the name was, but I'm sure we had a kind of a working title, but it never got far enough in that realm to even be cloned or, be available. Like you'll find bootleg versions of the Last Starfighter, on there. And so what happened was, Atari fell apart, and right as we finished the game, literally 2 weeks after we finished the game, Atari collapsed and was bought by Jack Tramiel. Mm-hmm. And he came to us, and we actually, out of the 80 people in the division, Gary and I were amongst the 5 people that were retained. We were actually working on an 800 version of a Dune game at that point. Actually, we had started doing prototypes and developing for that. But then a couple months later, he disbanded everybody and basically said, we'll just work with contractors at that point. And then about a year or two later, and they shelved the game. They shelved the Last Starfighter game. And then a year or two later, Jack came back to us and said, you know what? We got this game. It's a good game. But we can't use it because we don't want to spend, basically, I didn't want to spend $4 million for a licensing fee for, at the time that, it was a lot of things going on, as I'm sure a lot of the stories at Atari at that time, what I called the Fall of Atari. Mm-hmm. He came back and said, we got this game. Can we just tweak it a little bit to, make it usable so that, people can get it out there?
You were still working? You weren't there at that point, though, were you?
No. So basically he contracted us for a fairly small fee to change the splash screen, get rid of any references to the Last Starfighter, but, the bulk of the game remained the same. And so that's how it morphed into Star Raiders 2, which, at one point in one way we liked and one way we didn't like. We didn't like it because it really had nothing to do with the original Star Raiders. But on the other hand, at least our game got out there in some fashion, which, as a developer, you hate to, spend a year of your life, working 18-hour days and have it come to nothing. So
sure. So going back to when you had this game, mm-hmm. your Xylon Attack game, we'll call it for that moment, and they wanted to use the Last Starfighter IP. Did you get to see the movie at that point, or?
Yeah, actually, that was one of the fun things. We actually got to go down to, so we were up in Sunnyvale, and we got to go down to Lorimar Studios down in L.A. Mm-hmm. and see the movie before it was released, several months before it was released, probably 6 months before it was released, and in blue screen with minimal graphics and very little sound. But we got the idea of the thing, and they gave us a lot of sketches. We met the director, and so we that was actually pretty cool. And one of my keepsakes is I got a Last Starfighter poster that I still have and
nice.
And, post at my work sometimes or whatever. So
did the game change after you saw the movie, or were you just like, good enough?
It did change, but it was. We looked at the elements that we had and tried to fit what we could. We already had kind of the concept of you're over a planet, but we changed how we did warping between planets and things like that. We wanted to try to figure out if we could actually incorporate. I don't know if you remember the movie at all, but they had this at the very end they had this thing where the ship goes crazy and
shoots in all the directions it wants.
Yeah. And
I saw the movie on Laserdisc when it came out at a friend's house at a sleepover. That's the only thing I remember about that stupid movie was that last scene. And I remember thinking that's ridiculous. I was a kid. I was 13 or something. I'm just like, wow, that's really stupid.
Yeah, it was definitely a disappointment of a movie in some respects, but it. Like I said, we enjoyed working with it just because it was kind of cool for us.
Sure.
Get to, like I said, meet the director, see the movie, see the, the things that go, beforehand. And at the time, it had the movie itself had a lot of bleeding edge graphic stuff, that it was doing in the movie itself. Yeah. So it was also cool to see that. But we just changed splash screens and names of things, and tried to incorporate as much as we could. But we couldn't change so much that to fit the movie, just because it was tried to get it out at a reasonable time, and
Sure.
we were killing ourselves as it was to get it out.
And I'm sure you had a deadline to meet in order to get it out to
Yeah,
timed with the movie.
exactly. The movie was coming out in late June, early July, and I think we finished it towards like in the middle of May, something like that.
And then the movie probably came out around the same time that the Tremills bought Atari, so that deal was just scuttled at that point.
Yeah, Tramiel came in and he looked at. I mean, he looked at all the contracts that they had, and this contract, I remember it was a $4 million royalty to the movie company. He says this game's not going to make $4 million on top of everything else. That's silly. So it just didn't make business sense,
Sure.
which I totally understood. But
Absolutely,
it was still disappointing to us.
I was going to say something else about it. Did you at any point send it in and have notes from the movie producers about the game, or did you just send it in and you were done, or what?
That's an interesting question. I don't remember much involvement from the movie director caring too much about what the game did.
Now, there was an arcade version of Last Starfighter, I believe.
No, not that I remember, but there could have been.
Oh, maybe it was just in the movie.
It was in the movie. It was, but there wasn't anything.
You're right. Sorry.
Yeah. In fact, I think a lot of people expected there to be, and that was kind of one of the things that people were kind of looking for because it kind of looked kind of cool as a movie. And
there's a game in the movie called The Last Starfighter.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, with the train thing or whatever. Yeah.
Right. I remember that. All right. So, how did you? So the Tremills come in. How did you? Were you let go? Did you get a?
Yes. So they. So a little bit more background. I don't know how much people know of what I call the Fall of Atari. So, when I started, Atari was gangbusters. It was hot, flying high, but within months of when I started, they got rid of the management and brought in like a CEO from Pepsi, and he started uncovering and exposing a lot of craziness that was going on in the company from a business perspective. So just lots of stupid things. As an example, I remember he was talking to the whole company, or maybe it was somebody was talking about in a public forum that they had, for instance, found that they closed a couple of years prior, they had closed a group like of 25 people or so in Massachusetts that was doing some game development or something. And they closed that department, that office, and they were still paying everybody. It was just, and there was a lot of money, just crazy money thrown away on, like the stuff that I talked about, like they were doing the movie, trying to get into the movie business. That was, you could argue that there could be money to be made there, but there was, I never actually saw it, but I heard that they were doing like a whole bunch of mainframe kind of computer things that were trying to help develop mind control software and stuff. I mean, just people, just whatever crazy idea they had, they were funding, and not to mention all the crazy things that went on with the sales and the ET game was definitely one of the big things. But there was a lot of stuff. People point to that as the big thing, but that was just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. There was all sorts of things going on. So we're kind of seeing this indirectly. I don't know if you know how they were structured. In some ways it was smart, and in some ways it was kind of stupid. For the game programmers, they actually had a bonus structure that up front, after you completed a game, didn't matter what the game was, they would give you a $40,000 bonus as an advance against royalties. Mm-hmm. With the presumption that the game would sell more than that, and some did and some didn't. Some made more, and if you did that, you got bigger royalties. And a lot of the guys, not a lot, but several of the guys were very wealthy from that. But that bonus, within 6 months of my starting there, went from 40,000 to 20,000, and then another 3 months it went to 12,000, then it went to 8,000. So it was clearly they were resetting kind of internal expectations and things going on. So
And the bonus is the reason that you went to Atari is word of
well,
this bonus,
it was
right?
definitely the reasons, but I mean, even if it wasn't like theoretically, it was an advance against royalties. So theoretically, if the game did well, you would still get royalties on top of that.
Right.
So it's like okay, the advance, but even then, part of the reason that they did poorly was because they also structured the bonus such that it was based on units shipped, and they never subtracted units returned. Mm-hmm. So, as an ET, as an example, they might have shipped 2 million units. 1.5 million came back, but the guy who, made the bonus based on how many shipped, not how many were returned at, not the net. But anyhow, so we saw this happening. We saw a lot of these, heard a lot of these stories, a lot of craziness, but we were just focused on our game. We were just, working day and night trying to get it out, do the best we could. Had a lot of fun, did a lot of cool things in it. And then right as we released the game, typically we, went through QA, everything was looking good. And we're sitting there in May sometime, finished the game, and we're kind of sitting there waiting like, okay, what's going on? There's usually at that point, you hear stuff from manufacturing, there's marketing things going on, there's like activity outside of the development department that's showing that something's going on, and it's just crickets. And then 2 weeks later, the announcement, Jack Tramiel came and bought the company. And then they went through a whole interview process where they interviewed all the developers. I think they interviewed everybody in the company. And like I said, out of the 80 developers, myself, Gary, and 3 other guys were kept. And then we basically went to a different, they moved us out of the office, went to a different office, and sat there more or less twiddling our thumbs for 2 months because not only did they lay off the developers, but they also laid off all of our infrastructure team, which the development environment we had was actually an emulator driven from the back end from a VAX machine with logic analyzers tied to it. It was a pretty complex environment, but it was a great development environment for the Atari. We didn't develop on the actual Atari machines themselves. And he laid off all the people that supported that environment. So the environment we were used to working in, we couldn't do anything with. So we did some designs, we were working on stuff, and it was just kind of like not really going anywhere. And then Jack eventually came to us several months later, basically towards the end of July, and said, I think I'm just going to have everybody that wants to develop games work as a contractor. And how would you like to work as a contractor? And I'll pay you a quarter of what you're making, and then maybe give you a bonus when if your game sells. And at that point, we already had jobs lined up because the writing was on the wall. Right. But it was kind of sad in a lot of ways because it was a fun place to be, and it was we enjoyed what we did. It was really interesting because it kind of killed the whole industry for several years. Just everybody just was down on game did development for a while.
So what were you were off doing another job in 1986 when he came back to you and talked about Star Raiders 2?
Right. Both Gary and I were in different companies doing other things, but so we basically did weekends and nights and now
at that point, did you feel like, how did you feel? Because Star Raiders certainly has had and has a legacy as one of the best games ever for that machine. Did you feel like you're following and doing an important job here, or was it just like, we're just going to get this contract?
Well, yeah, it was a little of both and a little trepidation because of that. Mm-hmm. It was like I said, we wanted to get the game out there. We wanted to have it developed, and we didn't really. It's sad that it sat there. On the other hand, like you said, Star Raiders had such a great following, and the game that we developed, although we liked it, we thought it had a lot of great stuff, was nothing really thematically like Star Raiders, the original. So, from that perspective, it was like, but on the other hand, we at least got our game out, and so it was at least a way to publish something.
Sure. As a kid, as a dirty pirate child, um, I had copies of Last Starfighter and Star Raiders 2, and it
Hmm.
was clear it was the same game. And I had like heard through my grapevine, of other dirty pirate friends that it had been renamed, but really I had no idea how it was actually released, which was the demo,
Which
which
is
was
the
the
real
demo.
one.
Yeah, yeah, it didn't matter. It was,
Well, the thing is that, at least it went through a full QA cycle. It was a ready to release game, and so it wasn't like, it was a game that was half done or whatever. It's pretty much a complete game, so at least that, that incarnation of it is, wasn't horrible in and of itself.
right.
But we changed a lot of little things. The splash screen we changed, and some of the text that went across the screen or that, was, said. So,
Right.
we tried to change as little as we could with, to get away with it,
Sure.
to be honest.
So, okay, you mentioned Dune. Tell me about that. Tell me about other projects that you may have started and not finished.
Dune was the main one. We again, it was tied to the movie Dune coming out, and so we were we did the 2600, which was we were actually very fortunate. We felt ourselves very fortunate because we actually had 16K to develop our game in, and most of the games on the 2600 were 8K games,
Mm-hmm.
and even on the 5200, a lot of them were 8K games. So we got 16K, so we actually had a lot of room to work. But they, well, although it was still like the tightest code ever to get in there, it was pretty ridiculous. But the Dune, and that was another one we got to see a lot of the that one was almost an ET like situation where the movie was coming out and they wanted a game fairly quickly. It was like not really enough time before the movie came out to actually develop a game. But there wasn't the same driving factor, because at that time we were just starting that. Like I said, as soon as we finished we'd start a few weeks before that started. We were starting on the Dune concepts and game, and we were going to basically make it. Think of Dig Dug a little bit. It was going to be, the sandworms and riding sandworms and kind of doing that sort of thing. We did get to see the movie, and that at that point it was basically a complete movie at that point. So that was kind of cool too. But we didn't really have. But I of course read all the books, so it's like I already knew the theme, and we already kind of knew a lot of the things that were going to go on, with that. So. So we started. It was mostly conceptual at that point. We did a little bit of coding, but it was really more designing the graphics, designing some of the gameplay, because that was really the one of the things I learned in the process. Is how tricky gameplay is. You can do all, and that it came out in a lot of the games that didn't work well, right? I mean, if you have to have this right level of challenge and reward, and all that kind of stuff has to fit just right for you to want to continue to play the game. And it's completely different from an arcade game versus a home computer game. And those were some of the things we were still learning, I think, even as a company at that time, kind of gameplay theory, if you will. So that was kind of interesting. And Dune was, going to be a different thing altogether. But we didn't get far enough, from a programming perspective to have anything that would have survived any sort of, archival or anything. But it would have been fun. Like I said, we had been bandied around a lot of ideas, and thought it had some concepts that could work.
So on Last Starfighter, I know you did the 5200 version and the 8-bit computer version. Were they developed simultaneously, or did you do the 5200 version first and then just change the joysticks, or how did it?
Yeah, we did the 5200 first, and I would say that there was almost no or very little tweaking we had to do for the 800 version. Mm-hmm. I don't remember making a lot of changes to make that work. It was primarily because the basic platform was identical. It was really just one was in a different form, and the joysticks were different, but most of the controls, they work the same. So I don't think we had to do a whole lot of different things for that. I don't remember spending a lot of time worrying about that. Worrying about more things like how to make the explosions look cool.
Right.
One of the coolest things we did programming, as I don't know if you guys get into this on this level, but
Yeah.
one of the challenges with a platform like that is that there's no random number generator, and we didn't want the explosions to be the same explosion every time you did something. We wanted it to sometimes be a big explosion, and maybe you hit something and then it sputters out as it dies, or different things. And to do that, we kind of needed some sort of random number generator. But we had to develop our own because there was no built-in random number generator in there, and there's no date time that you could use. It was a lot of the things that today, even if you want to develop, you had all sorts of things that you could do to start a seed and to, develop it. There was, nothing you could do. We didn't have any space. So we actually used an index into the code itself to generate the random number, and then that, it would go through, and then it would stop, and then that would be the seed for the next index into the code. It was a very, very efficient, and it was one of those things that it had the side benefit of being somewhat random, but with explosions, it actually generated patterns. So you would get random pattern, but it wasn't completely just, it was, pattern. So it was actually kind of cool. It was one of those fun things that we ended up doing.
Can you think of anything else you did technically that was interesting like that?
We just overall, it was, and I think this is true of all of the games that were developed at the time, but you had very little time to process things. You had the vertical blank and the horizontal blank, which is on the TV, that's the side times when the ray is going around and from top to bottom. Mm-hmm. And so you had very little time, so you had to balance time, and you had very little, we had 16K, a lot of games only had 8K. You can't even say hello world, without, 2 megabytes or 2 gigabytes these days of RAM. And, so every nibble, every bit that you used had to have purpose, and you had to, do the most efficient. One of the things that we had, and again, using my random number generator, we had a planet, and we had a scrolling planet. And so we tried to develop, that. And so it was like, and we had, different planets every time you went somewhere. Well, we didn't really have the space to store, what a planet would look like. So we had to generate it randomly every time. And so that was kind of cool, just getting it so that it would look close enough to a, that you could, envision it being that. I don't know. There was, a lot of things that we had fun with. The warping between planets, was, kind of, developing that. And, there was a lot of, it was a lot of tweaks. You spent a lot of time worrying about, in those days, the sprites didn't have a lot of pixels, so you had to be real creative with, what a spaceship looked like, or what there was at least 2 Easter eggs that we put in there. One of them's the Star Trek Enterprise that goes across the screen at some point. And I don't remember what the other one was, but there was at least 2 Easter eggs that were in there.
Nice.
I remember I think the Star Trek, you had to, it would show up occasionally when you were refueling at the sun. You had to refuel at the sun. So there was some sequence you had to go through there to get that to show up. I remember that, something like that.
Nice.
So, we put a little bit of that in there. It was one of those things, you're officially not supposed to, but,
Right.
And, we only did it, because it took almost no memory or space to put it in. Literally, you're down to looking for every byte you can, at that point. So it was definitely a fun time. I mean, it was the place was a fun place to work, but it was pretty crazy. We were more heads down, working than most people were at the time. There was, a lot of people that either had developed the game or resting on their laurels, or, I would say, there's a reason that out of 80 people, they only kept 5 because, either the other, the ones were high priced or whatever, or they just weren't producing. And so, there was a lot of people that had done something and then, really never developed after that, did anything after that.
Yeah. Did you know Glenn, the 5200 man?
Yeah, I did. Not well, but yeah, no, I interacted a little bit. I wasn't in the in crowd. Mm-hmm. Mostly, I guess, back to the point, that a lot of the guys partied and whatever, and we were really focused on getting our game out. We were, literally, 9 o'clock in the morning till midnight, working pretty much every day, 6 days a week at least, kind of, not because anybody told us we had to, because we wanted to get it done and we enjoyed it. And, we would take our breaks, we went and, I remember we went to the opening of the Return of the Jedi, as a research project. And, because, we were looking at the explosions. How did they do that?
Nice. What haven't I asked you that I should have?
I think that's a lot of what was going on. I think, like I said, there's a lot of weird stuff that went on there. A lot of weird people, working late at night. I remember we were there at midnight and all of a sudden music starts blasting like 100 decibels or 1,000 decibels, or whatever, and just down the hall, some guy's playing his, electric guitar at like, super high levels and completely spaced out, I think. But it was like I said, the environment was definitely fun, and it was sad to see it collapse. It really was, and but it was also one of the, I was young in my career. And so it was also a great learning experience from I looked at it like, gee, if this company can collapse, maybe I better learn a little bit more about, not just engineering, but, the business side of it. Because if I ever start my own company, I don't want that to happen. So,
right, yeah.
So it kind of prompted me to look into that part of the world a little bit differently.
Do you still have an Atari computer?
No. I eventually, it's after you don't plug it in for 10 or 15 years, and I moved several times in my career cross country and stuff, and you just, eventually get rid of it.
Sure.
I still have kind of the shrink wrap games that, we had, the Star Raiders 2 games that were produced, and so I still have a couple of those. And, those are my main, trophy pieces, if you will. Nice. And of course my Last Starfighter poster.
What do you do today?
I manage software development in a fairly large IT shop, actually for the city of New York. So, I've been involved in software development and or IT management, forever. Done, a lot of both software development, my early part of the career, and then, in the last 10 years more, IT and development management. So, enjoy both worlds, but, it's at some point the programming, keeping up with all the latest, not so much language is never an issue, but just the libraries that you have to relearn every 3 to 5 years. It just got boring. So I decided, I was more of an algorithm guy, in those days, and that, once not as much of that work kind of came around, and so I just moved into project management, and that was a kind of a good fit for me.
I think that's about all I have for you.
Okay, great. No, thanks for interviewing me.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate it.
All right.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator. creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.